This is a recording of my talk from BibleTech 2013, and today I'm going to be talking about 7 ways to grow your Bible app community. Now, as you can probably tell by my accent, I am not from Seattle. I'm from the UK, but my home for the last 7 years has been Shanghai in China. I work for a company called ReignDesign, and we create iPhone apps and Android apps for our clients, including companies like Porsche, Weight Watchers and Standard Chartered. But we also create our own apps, and that includes 2 popular Bible apps called Bible Promises and Biblegram. And we're a very multicultural team. We have people from the UK, the US, Germany, Chile, Italy, China and Korea. So why do I feel that I can stand here and talk to you about growing an app community? Well, the story starts around 4 years ago when 2 things happened. First, Apple launched the iPhone, and soon after that, third-party apps. Perhaps more importantly, the company that I was working for went bankrupt. So me, together with a few of my colleagues, were trying to figure out what to do next. And the fact that we had these new kind of devices that were able to run apps was a really exciting moment. The iPhone was really the first mobile device which was capable of running desktop quality software, and it was also a much more personal device. And therefore it seemed to us that a really ideal form of content for this new mobile paradigm was a Bible app, and that gave us the idea for Bible Promises, topical Bible software designed to be used on a mobile phone. So in April 2009, we launched the first version of Bible Promises. And let me give you a quick video demo just to show you how Bible Promises works.
Addiction, loneliness,
so you'll see I'm scrolling through some categories.
We frequently add new topics that
we
are
divided
suggested by our readers.
Our content into different topical
Let's
categories.
choose healing.
I'll choose healing.
Now you can see a list of verses
now
about
I'm
healing
going to scroll
from the
through the
Old and New
verses.
Testament. Then touch on a verse to enlarge it.
And now I can
swipe left
flick
and
through
right
different
to scroll
verses
between
with
all
a
the
nice
verses
background.
about
I can
healing.
also share the verse if I
I
want.
like this verse,
or add it
so
to
I
my
touch the
favourites.
star to add it to my favourites.
And let me go back now.
Let's go back to the
take a
main
look at
menu.
the list of my favourites.
Tapping here,
sorted by
I
the
can see
different
all the verses
categories.
I've added.
So when we started Bible Promises in 2009, we were a new startup company and we were creating a new app. We had no existing community. How were we going to create a community from scratch? Well, first thing I want to do is say maybe that's not the right approach. I like this quote from Mark Zuckerberg of Facebook. Communities already exist. Instead of creating a community, think about how you can already help existing communities do what they want to do. So for the rest of this talk, I'm going to be taking you through 7 of the different lessons that we learned while trying to build our communities around the app. Now the first, and maybe the most important lesson we learned, was the importance of asking our users for feedback. Now I've already shown you how Bible Promises works, and here is the UI of the first version. And perhaps the most important button in the entire user interface was one that we added at the bottom, Suggest a New Category. Suggesting a new category was a way for us to get lightweight feedback from our users, and it gave them a way for them to make suggestions on how to make the whole app better. And that really was a really important moment for us because it took it from being a one-way thing where we would just create all the content and send to the users to much more of a conversation. And so we started getting emails from our users with lots of suggestions, both of content and features that they'd like to see in the app. Now, at ReignDesign, we like to make sure that every email that someone sends to us gets a reply. And reading the emails that you get from your users is such an important way of connecting with them. I love this quote from Matt Mullenweg. I can't emphasize enough how important it is to answer your own customer support emails. But of course what happens is, as your app gets popular, your customer support can start to feel like this. You can get really overwhelmed with all the different suggestions that you've received. So there are a few different ways of dealing with that. We've used some different tools. For example, we use a service called User Voice that creates a kind of ticketing system around our support. So any email that comes in gets put into that system, and then several members of staff can reply to those easily and keep track. And we received all sorts of useful feedback, things like people wanting search or wanting additional translations of the Bible, new backgrounds. Sometimes people will even request things which are already in the app. Maybe they're running an older version, or maybe they just didn't discover this feature yet. In that case, it's really useful to set up canned responses, like quick replies that you can send to people who are asking the same thing again and again. It's also really important to close the feedback loop. So if you do actually go ahead and implement a feature or add some content that someone requested, do take the time to go back and email that person again and let them know that their suggestion is now in the app. The second lesson that we learned was internationalization, really taking a much more worldwide view of our audience. Because Christianity is a worldwide religion. And I think as software developers, or particularly if we're based in the US, it's very easy to forget that you are weird. And what do I mean when I say you are weird? Weird stands for Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic. And yet, a lot of the people who are maybe in your audience don't fit into those categories. And how do you decide who to target? Well, the first thing to do is to look at your data. So let's take languages. What we did is we looked at the data that our analytics were recording to see what was the most popular device language on the devices where people had installed Bible Promises. And of course, English was the most popular. But even though the content of the app was only in English to begin with, we could see there were a lot of people who had Spanish or French or German or Italian set as their device language. So that helped us understand where to take our app next. And so we created localized versions of the app with those languages. You have to remember that supporting additional languages is quite an ongoing commitment. As well as having to translate buttons in the user interface, you may also have to create new marketing material. You'll have to be able to cope with support queries coming in different languages. You might also need to license new content for different versions of the Bible that you might add. And internationalization is not just about languages. It's also about the places people live, the countries. Now, I was looking at some of our stats recently, and I found a kind of interesting contrast. Looking at the countries where the iOS version of Bible Promises was downloaded, the most popular three countries are the US, the UK, and Australia. And then I compared that to our Android app, which is available on Google Play. And again, US was the top country. But then the second country was Nigeria. And the third country is the Philippines. So interesting contrast. And what's going on here? You can see that maybe the Apple app is more located in countries which are slightly richer and more English-speaking countries. The Android app, which is also a free app, is much more diverse. And if you look at the populations of Christians in these countries, there are 227 million Christians in the US. There are 80 million Christians in Nigeria. And there are 90 million Christians in the Philippines. And so it turns out the three countries in which our Android app is most successful are the three countries in the world which are English-speaking and have the largest Christian populations. So increasingly, as smartphones become more and more prevalent, your audience is really getting closer and closer to just the general population. The third lesson we learned was how to inspire daily habits. Why is this so important? Now, smartphones, although we live in a very multitasking world, smartphones are inherently single-tasking. You can only use one smartphone app at a time. And people want to quickly switch between the different contexts that they're using. So that means the average session time of a user using your app is very short. Now, maybe on a desktop app, you do hope that someone's going to use your app for 10 or 15 minutes. Maybe on a smartphone app, you think it's going to be less, perhaps 5 minutes. Do you think maybe the average session time 2 minutes? Would that be a lot to expect? The median session time of an app is just 26 seconds. And if people are only using an app for 1 minute at a time, or less than 1 minute at a time, it's really easy for them to just forget all about it. So how do you encourage this kind of repeat use? How do you encourage community when people are using an app for such short sessions? And the solution we came up with this was notification. So here's an example of a daily notification.
You can choose to receive a daily verse notification like this at 10 a.m. each
A banner's
day.
appeared at the top of the iPhone screen, and that appears every day at 10 a.m. and it's accompanied with a sound, which I'll play you right now. And I've had people tell me that, they're running like a Bible study group in the morning, and a lot of people have downloaded the app, and then this sound will sound at 10 a.m. 20 different phones going off at the same time. And the combination of a regular schedule and a sound which identifies the app is a really great way of driving that usage into people's minds. And people like this feature as well. I was just looking at the reviews for our app in the App Store and pulled these out from the last 10 reviews. 4 of them mentioned how important the daily updates were. The daily updates and alerts keep me grounded in God's work. Such an awesome app. I really enjoy the daily messages, and so on. The 4th lesson we learned was how to use social media smartly. Now, so much has been written about people who use social media and how to communicate to them. But how do you use social media in a really smart way? And again, I think it goes back to understanding your audience, because there's a tendency to think that the people who are mainly using social media are young people, on their smartphones the whole time. But that's really not true anymore. Users of social media and mobile devices don't just look like this. Maybe they look like this. Many of your audience look like this, or look like this. So reaching them means finding the right social networks and the right content. So next time you're thinking about a social media strategy, it's more than just Facebook. Of course, Facebook's very important. It's one of the biggest networks in the world. Twitter as well. Probably a lot of your users are using Twitter. You want to be there. But don't forget about the other social networks. There are now 49 million Pinterest users. How do they overlap with the audience of your app? There are 96 million blogs on Tumblr. I don't know if many of you recognize this icon. This is one of the largest social networks in China, Sina Weibo. This has over 500 million accounts. And that's not even the largest social network in the world. Don't forget what you might think of more old-fashioned forms of communication. But email, we have a mailing list for Bible Promises, and it's one of the best ways for us to reach our community. There are over 4 billion email accounts in the world. And almost everyone in the world has a mobile device, and even if they don't have a smartphone, they have access to SMS. There are over 6 billion SMS accounts in the world. So enabling sharing of content via SMS is a great way to spread the content you're providing to other people who may or may not have your app. The other thing about social media is to think not just which networks you're supporting, but the kind of content that works well on different networks. Here's an example. This is from our Facebook page. And every day we post a daily verse. And for Facebook, that's done in a just text-only way. So we say today's Bible Promises on health. And this works really well on Facebook. It's a really lightweight way to share content. You see we get 17 shares there, 71 likes. Contrast that to Pinterest. On Pinterest, we try to create much more visually rich content. That's what's going to help you get repins. Also, you've got to consider that social media should not just be a broadcast mechanism. You've got to try and create conversations. And one great way of doing that is to ask questions. Here's a good example. We just asked a really simple question on Facebook. Which book of the Bible is your favorite and why? And just with that question, we've immediately got 18 people sending replies. Maybe it's not the most challenging question in the world, but it's a great way for people to immediately add their input. The fifth way that we learned to grow our community was by using our data and using all the data we'd collected. And why is using data so important? Maybe you've heard of a rule called the 99-1 rule. And this is often used with reference to online communities. Typically, 90% of users are quite passive. They're mainly consuming information, just reading content. 9% of users are going to be a little bit more active. Maybe they'll share some content. And only the top 1% of users do you expect to be really deeply engaged, creating new content and so on. So the 90%, if they're using an app, they're mainly just browsing. Perhaps they'll search or mark some things as favorites. Maybe 9% of users will take a few more heavyweight actions. So maybe they'll share a piece of content to a friend or they'll add a tag. But really only 1% of users would be doing things like writing a comment or emailing you with a suggestion, or maybe if you have a forum, creating a new forum thread. Now, we're trying to build communities and we really want to, push people up this pyramid. We want people to be more actively engaged with our apps. But most of the people are not explicitly telling us what they want. So how do we improve the app? Now, as I mentioned, the 90% of people who are mainly just browsing, how do we get information about them? Now, we can use data. We can use data that we collect from the kind of lightweight actions that we've included in our app. Let's take favoriting and searching as examples. Anytime someone favorites a piece of content, that's really critical information for us. It helps us find the most popular information in the app. It helps us make recommendations. Also, search. Search is really good not only for surfacing content in your app, but for collecting useful information. Look at the popular searches that people are looking for. In particular, look at the popular searches that are not returning any results or not returning any useful results. Understand how that might help you add new content or find better ways of surfacing content in your app. Lesson number 6 is how to build a brand. So I've told you a lot about Bible Promises. Last year, we decided that because Bible Promises have been a success, we wanted to try and create a second app. And this time we really wanted to make it social at the core. We noted the rise of photo sharing apps, so things like Instagram. And looking at the way people were using Instagram, we noticed that a lot of people were sharing photos that they created and adding Bible verses on top of those. And so we wanted a way to help people create these kind of moments. Again, thinking back to what Mark Zuckerberg said, we noticed that the community was already doing something. We wanted to provide them with a tool to do this in a more easy and beautiful way. And so we came up with the idea for Biblegram. Let me show you a short video just explaining how Biblegram works.
Introducing Biblegram. Let's start by taking a photo. Biblegram is all about sharing your moments and the Word of God. Once you've taken a photo or chosen from your camera roll, apply a filter effect. We've got 6 filters to choose from. Now, choose a Bible verse from a topic like love, faith, or family. Our Bible Promises community has handpicked hundreds of verses that will be suitable for every moment. And of course, you can share your images through email, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Biblegram. Share Your Moments. Download it from the App Store.
Now, when we created Biblegram, what we really didn't want to do was create two completely disparate apps with no connection between them, because we already spent a lot of time, building up our community for Bible Promises. So it didn't make sense to try and create a new community from scratch for Biblegram. They really were two apps serving the same community. And so we tried to find ways to link the two apps together. And one way we did that was visual continuity. So if you notice, the two apps have a common element in their icons. They have this gold border. And we tried to carry that through things like the App Store screenshots to make sure that someone who used one app could understand that the second app was connected. We also shared a lot of things like the social media accounts. So we didn't set up new social media accounts of Biblegram. Instead, we reused the Bible Promises account. We also used the name of the apps as another way to remind people that these apps were connected. So the new app, rather than just call it Biblegram, we named it in the App Store Biblegram by Bible Promises. That created an easy link for people to understand they were the same thing. It also meant that anyone who searched just Bible Promises in the App Store would also come across Biblegram. Again, think back. You already have a community. Try and find new ways to help them do what they want to do. So, what next for our apps, and indeed for all the software we're creating? This is Tara Hunt, and she's made a presentation about fostering online community. She's an expert in growing digital communities. And in her opinion, there are kind of like 3 stages for online communities. The first are what she calls lightweight social processes. Those are the things that you can kind of layer on to an existing app, so favoriting, sharing, and so on. The next step is collaborative information structures, and that's when the core product becomes much more social. Think of Flickr, where social is at the core and sharing is at the core. Think Biblegram. But the third level is what she calls high-end collaboration. And that's when a community is able to create something together which they would not be able to create independently. A really good example of that is Wikipedia. It really wouldn't be possible without creating an online community around that content. As a developer, think of Stack Overflow and the way that thousands of people have come together to create the best answers for development questions. And so where I think we may be heading with Bible-related software is in getting these communities to come together and create really inspiring content together that wouldn't be possible alone. So thanks a lot for listening. Here are my contact details, and thanks a latte.